Today on Life on the X, we're speaking with Sergeant Tom Zizzo of the Los Angeles Police Department. Born and raised in New York City, Tom's decision to pursue a career in law enforcement was deeply influenced by the September 11th attacks when his family lost a close personal friend in the North Tower of the World Trade Center. That experience helped shape his commitment to public service. Since joining the LAPD in 2014, Tom served in a variety of assignments within one of the nation's largest police agencies. Today, he supervises the Hollywood Division Gang Enforcement Division, leading efforts to combat violent crime, reduce gang activity, and enhance public safety. Throughout his career, Tom's earned a reputation for professionalism, leadership, and dedication to the community. On this episode, we'll discuss his journey from New York to Los Angeles, the experiences that have shaped his career, and his perspective on leadership and modern policing. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. Those simple actions help us expand our reach and bring you more great content. One quick program note. If you're watching the podcast, you'll see a couple of segments of video drop off as we had a brief technical issue during recording. During these segments, the audio will still be present. We're glad you've joined us today. Enjoy the episode and welcome to Life on the X. Okay, Tom, welcome to the show. Welcome to Life on the X, and I really appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you, Sal.
Thank you for joining us from that fantastic view. I know you've got kind of you're out in the desert, and you promised me a couple of wild critters will run by, so I've got a critter watch as we record today. Appreciate you being on and giving me something to look at.
Yes, sir.
I want to kind of start off by going over almost from the start with your childhood and where you grew up and then kind of move and progress from there. So tell me, Tom, where did you grow up?
So I was born and raised in New York City at the bottom of Manhattan Island called Battery Park City. Born and raised there. Around 9, 10 years old, moved to Jersey City. Well, first to the Upper West Side for about 3 years, then ultimately Jersey City. Finished high school in New York City, then went to college in Pennsylvania, then UNLV after in Vegas, and then settled here in Los Angeles.
Excellent. Now you mentioned you were in New York City for a brief period of time, and do you have any siblings?
Only child.
Only man. I got to
Yeah.
tell you, I live vicariously through people like you. I'm one of 7, and right smack dab in the middle, and so there's never a lonely moment. There's always someone that you have to share your moments with, and so the opportunity to be alone is something you have to kind of make up for yourself. But I have a daughter, and she grew up basically, as an only child, and she eventually ended up having a stepsister. But yeah, it's kind of a cool life, and I dream about it. Although my brothers and sisters would tell me that I was too high maintenance for it to ever be alone. So, so you mentioned, Tom, earlier in a conversation that we had that right around age 9, there was an event in your life that affected your family, affected the New York City, affected the world. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, the September 11th attacks, World Trade Center. So, like I had mentioned, born and raised in Battery Park City, on Rector Place, just south of the towers, we had lived in an apartment, me and my father. And I would say approximately it's like 2 to 3 walking city blocks from the World Trade Center. So when I was 9 years old, those events took place. I was at school at the time, and my father was at home. He actually stepped outside when he heard the after the first plane hit. He went outside, saw the second one, and he was present for the whole event.
Wow. And
Yeah.
you were at school, and from your location at school, were you and your classmates, the school, able to even hear what was going on or have any understanding of what was going on at that time?
No, this was, I can't remember the address, but it was much further away. It was uptown. So
Okay.
we weren't really especially at that age, we weren't really apprised to what was going on as it was happening, but we
Yeah,
found out later. Certainly,
yeah.
yeah.
Because I would imagine, going home, and ultimately getting home was kind of a gigantic shock to you. What was that like?
Um, Surreal, actually.
Yeah.
So my father, who was present, he was there for the towers collapsing, people falling to their deaths, and after that, he was able to actually pick me up from school.
Wow.
Towards the end of the day, he was able to come uptown, pick me up, and we were able to go back down to ground zero. And then ultimately, we got on a water taxi and then went across the way to Jersey City. And I actually found this for you. This picture is me and my father after he picked me up from school, took me back down. So,
Wow.
um, and then we got on a water taxi to go across the Hudson River to Jersey City, where his mother lives, my grandmother, and we ended up staying there in Jersey City. I distinctly remember him walking me through, the neighborhood I grew up in. That was just, you know, had just been attacked. And then I distinctly remember when we were on the water ferry, on the water taxi, leaving the island, going across the way to Jersey City, looking back. And I still remember people, with their comments, looking back and just in shock and in disbelief that here was this skyline missing two very big skyscrapers and all of this smoke and debris and just very surreal. Yeah.
How does a 9-year-old process that? Yeah.
A 9-year-old doesn't really process that until later. And that's what I've experienced. At the time, I think the distinct memory, um, being on the water taxi looking back while leaving, that's when it clicked that something really bad happened. And what that meant to me was that a lot of people had to have been hurt. At 9 years old, you can't really grasp the severity, the
Right.
complexities of the attack and the motive and all of these things, until much later. Living in a post 9/11 world in New York City, going to school in New York City, riding the train to and from school, through middle school and high school, um, flying in a post 9/11 world, two wars that had kicked off in response to that. I think you process those, to answer your question, later as these events are taking place, as you
Yeah.
get older. Yeah,
Because you went back to a home, an apartment that was, for the most part, not inhabitable, or, um,
correct.
was there damage to your apartment, or was there an environmental issue with the amount of, we'll just say, toxic, dust and smoke, that was
Yeah.
present in the air?
Certainly the exposure to toxins, the apartment complex itself didn't suffer from what I saw any structural damage. And I actually went back last February, visited, and the same doorman was there. um,
Wow.
but there was no structural damage, but the roof, I remember we were on the roof and there was, you know, office items like papers and wallets and desktops and things like that on top of the roof. And the area was just covered in the debris.
Yeah.
Um, there was no long term staying there, breathing in that air, and everybody. It was a beautiful neighborhood. I went to kindergarten, preschool right across the street, and after that, it was you have to pack up and leave. There was no living there. That neighborhood was never going to be the same. The country was never the same, especially the neighborhood. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Um, and your family was affected by the tragic events that occurred there, particularly at the Twin Towers, on a personal level. Can you talk a little bit about that?
yeah. Yeah, so my mother was born and raised in Atlanta, and her and her mom and ended up living in New York City, and they befriended a woman named Christine Olander. And while living in the city, they were best girlfriends. And as a 8-year-old, 7-year-old, I get dragged around going shopping all around the city with them, and just Christine was the assistant GM at Windows of the Worlds on the 106th, I believe it was the 106th floor, and she went to work that day and did not come home. So, to
Was she in the North Tower, or? Is that the do you know is that the
Oh,
first
Lord.
tower that the Windows of the World?
I feel terrible for not knowing if it's north or south. I believe it's north, but, the tower that had the restaurant Windows of the World.
Yeah, I think
And,
I remember that as they were describing the first tower that and what was in that, and so she was there, and
she was
wow,
there, and she was one of the first callers, actually, and, she called and started asking for direction, how to evacuate the guests, the employees, the staff in the restaurant. Where can they go? What should they do? She had called multiple times, describing and illustrating the smoke, how heavy the smoke was, and all of that. And ultimately, she didn't come home that day. So the family lost a good friend, and you
yeah,
know,
wow, that's just tragic, and so sorry for you and your family, and um, that just what that day. It's hard to to pinpoint one family loss when so many families were affected, not just there in New York, but also in DC
yeah,
and ultimately in Flight 93 in Pennsylvania. Um, that all of this happened in a window of time that kind of left the whole world reeling. And as to coin your phrase, surreal is what and I've I think both you and I have experienced um, events in our lives where we might say, "Man, that just seems surreal," but
yeah,
so it's hard to even put that into the same category as this 9/11 event when it comes to surreal and how it affects a family. Your family knew her, and I'm assuming that she had a family as well. So it must have been an awful day, and for you ultimately what occurred was that your family ended up leaving that apartment and moving to another location. And how long were you there before you ended up uh, moving out, or did you remain there through junior high, high school?
So we left Battery Park immediately, stayed with my dad's mom in Jersey
Okay.
City, and then we moved to the Upper West Side and stayed there for about 3 years before relocating to Jersey City as well.
And at that time, you were still in middle school, or
Middle school, beginning high school.
okay.
Yeah.
And 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 you mentioned also that you attended a military school through high school, or was that
Through college.
through
Yeah. So,
college?
Valley Forge Military Academy and College, uh, they have I believe, a middle school, but they definitely have a high school. There's a middle school, high school, and 2 year junior college. And if you've ever seen the movie Taps with Tom Cruise, Sean Penn, it's filmed on campus with real cadets. Not the ending, but but when they're in chapel, they use real cadets, I believe. I mean, it looks how every Sunday looked at chapel when we were in there. But the campus, they use the campus, those barrackses. And I spent 2 years there, and I would say two of the best years of my developing young adult life were there.
What was the motivation to send you to that that school? I mean, your parents
So
must have thought, or maybe you even, like, heard about it and decided you'd like to go there.
that's a good question. So a lot of people, when they hear military school, they think there's some sort of disciplinary or reform approach to that. Um, there are places like that. Valley Forge is not one of them. This is a place where Norman Schwarzkopf attended, J.D. Salinger, Governor Westmoreland. Uh, this is a place where people from Ghana in the military could come for a year and get into the service academies here in the United States afterwards if they did a year at Valley Forge. This is a place where people commission into the military as officers in 2 years instead of four. And this is a prestigious place. Um, my mother had a friend who went there in high school, and she had asked him, "Oh, I don't know where my son's going to go to college. He's looking at this, looking at that." He goes, "I know the perfect place for your son. It's where I went, Valley Forge." So we ended up taking a trip there with him, and I fell in love with the place. I definitely was motivated by the events of September 11th, still am to this day. It drives my career, drives my discipline. At the time, I was pretty sure about law enforcement, but I was open to the military. So Valley Forge was, all right, let's see what I learn while I'm here. Let's see what direction this takes me. And again, the best 2 years of my developing young adult life into college and then after.
Well, you said something there. You said that the events of 9/11 kind of now at that point kind of forged in your mind a decision to go into public service and more specifically into law enforcement. Um, and and certainly that probably was aided by the fact that you ended up in kind of a military school, and kind of gaining that military bearing, and which made a much smoother transition into a lifestyle of service. Um, it was like at age 9 where you thought, "I'm gonna be a peace officer. I'm gonna be a police officer."
At age 9, I knew I was going into either law enforcement or the military. I knew it was one of those. And certainly, the the number of firefighters and police officers, from NYPD and Port Authority and then other agencies as well,
Yeah.
not to forget to mention them as well, were killed on 9/11. And so, living in that post 9/11 world, that exposure, it only pulled me in deeper.
Right.
Um, Hearing about the stories, like Dominic Pizzulo trying to trapped underneath the rubble, trying to signal for help by firing his weapon. These are stories that just captivated me, and I said, you know what? These are some good people. I want to live up to that. To that. I don't even know what you call it. That level of honor,
Yeah.
and
No, and
you
it's
know, it pulled me in. It pulled
yeah.
me in, and it spoke to me, and I've had no regrets since. And I became a Jersey City Police Explorer as soon as I could, and that was a great experience as well. Still in touch with a sergeant from that agency, and we're good friends. Spoke to him last week, so I was trying to get into uniform and service as soon as I could. And you ask my parents, they tell you the same thing. They couldn't stop me. So,
Really.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
and all the way through that military school experience, you're in your mind. I'm still kind of pointed toward law enforcement. Um, did you have any other influences in law enforcement beyond the fact that that's what you wanted to do? Did your family know people, or did you know someone personally?
No, my father, not law enforcement. My mother, not law enforcement. Nobody in the family, law enforcement.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
my grandfather served in World War II like many of our grandfathers, but I didn't have the opportunity to meet him. So there wasn't a family influence of any kind. This was all outside the family. I mean, to speak candidly, both my parents support me fully. I have their full support of my career choice and what I do now, but they did not want me to go into this career path, and that's okay. I understand why. But
right,
this was all outside influence.
right. Well,
Yeah.
that makes it all the more inspiring that you know, you were almost self-influenced by not only what was driving you inside, but maybe even a motivating factor of a current event. I mean, so many people who were older post 9/11 immediately joined the military,
Yeah.
and with the same kind of notion in mind and in heart of serving after such a heinous terrible crime and the devastation that had occurred as a result of it. And so, for a 9-year-old to set into their mind, this is what I want to do and this is what I am going to do, even to this day, never looking back and never, having second thoughts or regretting it is pretty inspiring. You mentioned that you then, after receiving an AA at Valley Forge, what was your major with your associates?
So I majored in criminal justice. Got my associates from Valley Forge, and then I continued to pursue my bachelor's at UNLV in Las Vegas.
Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
Vegas, baby.
Yes.
So, um, you talk about transition and, one environment, you know, uh, because you went from kind of an urban to somewhat maybe whatever Valley Forge, to a rural environment to a desert environment, and and Las Vegas in Nevada. Um, Tell me about the East Coast, West Coast transition because I've traveled to East Coast through work and vacation, and it's a different world, especially in New York when I've been there. And so, did you have a hard time adjusting? Did you notice anything that was different, or was like, this was meant for me?
So the transition from East Coast to West Coast wasn't too bad. My mother moved out to Los Angeles at an early age, and she remarried, and so I spent the summers coming out to LA. So I had some friends and some memories already here in Los Angeles, and while I wasn't set on LAPD, I was set on law enforcement. I was definitely looking at Jersey City Police, where I was an explorer, and so the transition from East Coast to West Coast wasn't too bad. Everything was established here in the West Coast and was fine. The transition was hard though, um, going from Valley Forge to UNLV. They are nothing alike, and
Yeah.
I really, really excelled at Valley Forge in terms of the cadet run corps model, military school model. Um, Formation, uniform, standards, everything that comes with being at a military academy. And then all of a sudden, it's like these expectations and these standards, nobody's looking at you for them.
Yeah.
So then you go to UNLV, and it's a totally different world. And I felt like a fish out of water. I still remember walking on campus, going, you know what? And I did do this. I said, I think I'm just going to transition everything to online. I just want to get my degree, get back in uniform, get back to something that feels familiar and comfortable, and get back to that paramilitary organization somewhere. And I was like, you know what? My mom's in Los Angeles. My dad is here in Vegas. That was also another motivating factor. My dad had moved to Southern Highlands in Nevada. So I said, hey, LAPD is a prestigious law enforcement organization. That's where I'm going to go.
Hmm. What year was this, Tom?
When I
Well, after you graduated, when you graduated from UNLV, do you recall the year?
Oh, 2013. It was December 2013.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, heck, I mean, you pretty much went from one doorstep to the next then, right? Uh,
I did. I wanted to get, like I said, I wanted to get back into something familiar, a lifestyle that felt familiar. So I
yeah.
took classes in the summertime, each summer session, and I graduated a semester early, graduated December 2013, got hired and started the academy March 2014. So there was only 3 months of not a student, not employed,
Wow.
just waiting for that phone call, got that phone call, and drove to LA from Nevada.
Pretty impressive. I mean, it just sounds even at this stage, you are a self-motivated guy. You don't necessarily need anyone to put a fire behind you. You have a plan. You set a course, and that's what you're gonna end up doing. Did you find any setbacks along the way?
Um, Sure, personal things that happen in life and, relationships or family things, but like anything else, these
Yeah.
seasons come and go, and they're just all character development. That's how I
Yeah.
chalk it up to anyway. I look back and I go, "You know what? This person comes into your life for this reason, and then they leave for this reason." So it's just all character development we all go through as a young guy or young girl, so but
Yeah.
nothing that hasn't killed me yet, so
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know.
Well, I mean, like you said, if it doesn't kill you, it'll make you stronger.
Yeah.
Um, LAPD Academy. W- I went through the CHP Academy in Sacramento, and so we both went to two prestigious academies. And LAPD's live in.
No, no,
Okay.
no, it's not. Yeah.
Um, and and so, what did you think of that experience? Going to an academy, especially one that is not live in, where like you've still got to function in life otherwise. And how difficult, if at all, although I don't think it was difficult for you, I'm somehow gonna believe that it wasn't. Um, but what challenges did you see during that period?
You know what? I'll be honest with you. I'll speak candidly. It was difficult because, and I hate to admit this, but I'll be real. I thought I had a handle on it before it started. I was like, hey, you know what? I went to Valley Forge, and man, what I went through there, like I can handle this. I knew it was going to be tough. I didn't have a lack of respect or reverence for what was coming my way, but I felt a little more confident because I could anticipate what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And the truth is, you ask anybody in law enforcement now, is this job what you thought it was going to be? Everybody will tell you, no, I was way off, And so I think I got ahead of myself sometimes and was a little overconfident. And then, of course, as in a place like a police academy at any agency, they're gonna humble you pretty quick, and they're gonna fix you, and that happened, and it's been, you know, it's
Yeah.
been good. So
Yeah. Um, I was in the Navy, and when I ultimately ended up at a CHP academy, I was kind of used to a boot camp atmosphere, and having to kind of go along with the program. And as you mentioned, there's this initial phase of really trying to break you down to build you back up. And I just knew it was all part of the program. But I agree with you. Um, when you go in with preconceived notions, though, you may end up um, stepping on yourself as a result of what I like to say is maybe knowing too much,
yes,
and that can sometimes hurt you as much as it does hinder you. It's a lot of times better to get the best experience, not having any understanding of what's going to happen, and then you kind of absorb more in a different way, better way. So that I
absolutely.
understand that at all as well. And so done with LAPD Academy, and now. And by the way, if you go to LAPD Academy, you're kind of you're slotted for a job with LAPD. So people don't go in there and saying, I got my post certificate, et cetera, through LAPD, and now I'm going to go and work for Oxnard or, some other agency. You're hired to work for LAPD once you're in the academy.
Right. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to go with an organization like LAPD. And in California, there's different processes to become a peace officer. I understand there's other places like Rio Hondo where you can get your post basic certificate and then get hired by other places.
Yeah,
But at LAPD, it's you apply for LAPD, background, polygraph, medical, psych, all of these things, all LAPD, and then an LAPD academy. And in the LAPD academy, they cover what's required by post and then what LAPD wants to teach. And you're hired, you're an employee, you're a recruit officer, and they're getting ready for you to start the field training program after 6 months and beyond that probationary period for a year, and they expect you to complete it. So it's all in house, all the training in service in house, and yeah, the academy same thing in house.
that's great. I think that's the best way. I mean, I felt like for me, having it in house and not and living in house was the best way for me to be successful at it, and get the full experience. But just having the opportunity to go to a place where you knew everyone was going to the same place once they graduated was part of what made it special, because then you built bonds that you knew that were going to be much more lasting. Even on the harbor patrol, everyone's spread across the state, but you're still part of the same team at that point, and you feel a much greater kinship to everyone who's in your class. So you graduated, um, and how was that first year? I guess now one of the things you mentioned in our prior conversation, you talked about these P levels, P1, P2, P3. For those who aren't familiar with that, how does that work with LAPD?
Sure. So if you've ever watched, and I don't, but if you ever watched The Rookie or other shows, you may hear the term P1, P2, P3. And basically, that is it's a ranking system where police officer is the same rank, but within that rank, you have police officer one, which is a probationary officer. This is somebody who just graduated the academy and is on their probationary period in the field training program. And that lasts for the first 12 months out of the academy. Then they become a P2. And as a police officer, too, they are no longer on probation. They don't need ratings. They don't need comment cards. There's less supervision now. They've been blessed. Hey, you've completed your probationary period, and Now you're out there working with other P2s. You're not with a field training officer. P1s we tend to put with senior officers when they're allowed to work with senior officers after the field training program. But when you make P2, you're a regular basic patrol officer. The guys that, if you were to call 911, would respond and show up in uniform for your call for service. And then you have your P3s, and those are your guys you'll see with two chevrons, right? Sometimes referred to as a corporal rank. We call them police officer threes. In the field, in the patrol function, typically those are your field training officers that are training your P1s. And that's a competitive spot. I had that spot for 3 years in Hollywood. I enjoyed being an FTO, and that you can make a career out of that assignment. You know, it's definitely a noble assignment being a field training officer.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I think across all agencies, and certainly broader, larger agencies, similar structures, and I think the objective is to not over inundate someone who's just graduated from an academy, and hopefully try to slowly create that maturation process of being a police officer and working with an FTO, and then ultimately working. I mean, I'm assuming that once you become a P2, you could conceivably be working by yourself, or does everyone double up even beyond that?
Sure. So no, as a P2, you could find yourself working an LCAR by yourself.
Yeah.
We have those units assigned as U-boats, and they're usually a report taking unit, report writing unit. They don't really go to anything that would require a two-man response or something tactical. But at LAPD, we do run two-man cars, A cars as we call them. And but sometimes we have odd numbers, so we'll
Yeah.
assign a U-boat, right, a person who's working by themselves.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's pretty interesting. I come from a culture where once you're once you're done with break-in, which could be uh, as long as 45 days after you get out of the academy, um, unless you're working graveyards, you're pretty much on your own, which is good and bad. But you learn to make your mistakes um, by yourself, but then again, you don't know if you've corrected your mistake, and so you do a lot of
Yeah.
asking questions, and 'cause there's no way. I mean, if I had the opportunity to write the book, I'd say, hey, listen, you need to spend more time with someone and learn all aspects, including the Highway Patrol has a more specific role, but it's much more expanded now into general law enforcement, and so just having that extra capability and the extra time to do that. I went in 1989, and 2 months after I got there, the Loma Prieta earthquake occurred, and then my whole life and my career just kind of went in kind of a weird way, and then shortly thereafter, the Gulf War started and everything got stranger again. But um, it sounds like within the confines of LA, that's a great system of making sure that you have someone to learn from and be able to respond tactically as a two person unit to more interesting and calls that might require two people. um, so in those early years of you with LAPD, what types of assignments did you have as a P1 and P2?
So out of the academy, I was a P1 learning patrol function from I had some great field training officers, and I did my first year on probation in Rampart Division. So was a P1 in Rampart, completed my first year, got sent to Hollywood Division shortly after, and I have spent most of my career in Hollywood Division. But when I wheeled to Hollywood, I was put in the Hollywood Entertainment District, which is a unit that does crime prevention and crime suppression in the entertainment district along the boulevard in Hollywood, along the Walk of Fame. So I
Wow.
was there for in Hollywood Entertainment District unit for about 4 or 5, no, 5 years. Then we had a special problems unit pop up, similar function, crime prevention in plain clothes. Did that for a year, and then ended up becoming a field training officer. Did that for 3 years before I promoted to sergeant.
Fantastic. And so in those early years for you, Tom, did you still have this strong sense of I'm in the right place and in the right direction, right agency? Um, did you at any point say, did I maybe I was better, I would have considered the military? I'm gonna say no because I feel like this is where you wanted to be, and you were home.
So interesting. Early on, you ask anybody that was there for it, they'd be like, no, this guy zeroed in on this whole being out there in the field, and you know the type,
Yeah,
being out there and just proactive policing in that area. I mean, it was my 20s were a blur. Okay, working a 410 with a lot of overtime, and
yeah,
just with a young partner who had more time on than me, but was also young, learning from him, and he knew what he was doing. People like that bring you along, and then it just becomes a good time.
yeah,
I mean, the adventure and the experiences and the stuff that you're learning and seeing, I mean, that nobody else gets to see or do. It's an adventure, the whole thing, right?
right.
And you know, looking back, no regrets, right? Number one, no regrets. There are some interesting federal entities that I could have considered early on that I wouldn't be, if I could do it over again, maybe, okay. But I'm happy where I'm at.
Yeah.
LAPD is a great agency. My experiences have been great. I have no complaints. Um, yeah. So
A number of my friends, and I don't know if it was one of your considerations, went to the bureau,
that's what I
and
was referring to, actually.
yeah, went to the bureau, and a couple of them came back because that's kind of a different ride as well. But yeah, sometimes you have to leave a place to realize how much maybe you didn't want to leave the place you just left. And
Yeah. And
sometimes
a
you
lot
have
of
to leave a
people
place
do
to figure out
that.
how much you needed to leave. But yeah,
Yeah.
um, I,
I
I
was
can
thinking
understand.
about, to answer your question, I was thinking, when I was pausing and thinking, the bureau was what I was considering because we talk about my motivations to get into law enforcement. I'm in a master's program now for terrorism and counterterrorism, and here I am studying terrorism. Uh, the motivation to get into this field was because of 9/11, and then sometimes I find myself asking myself, okay, what counterterrorism am I doing here at LAPD? And like any police officer, after 10 years, so on, you start looking back and going, what am I doing?
Yeah, yeah,
Some people become disillusioned. Some people, they become jaded, disillusioned, all of those things. Again, no regrets, but you do look back and you go, am I feeling fulfilled, right? Am I
yeah,
hitting the things that I want to hit, right? So that does come up. But again, I wouldn't change it because, like you said, people leave. And I've seen people leave and I've seen people come back and I've told
yeah,
them, you're going to come back. And they do. They do,
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's better to get it out of your system, and instead of feel like, okay, man, I if only I had, or well, whatever. And for you, ultimately, you had other pathways to venture into, which included promotion. Um, so you promoted to sergeant, and which is, I mean, that's a whole new ball game,
Oh, yeah.
um, because I just remember when I went to my first day of sergeant leadership supervisory course, which is a 2-week course. They the facilitators had us look around, and they like, take a look at these folks. These are your new friends. I thought, uh, everyone else is no longer your friend. I'm like, that's not true. But but what I did get out of that was that, hey, this is a new realm of my career, and I had promoted late, and so I had already had some bad habits, I would just say, as an officer otherwise, but you ended up promoting, and what what inspired you to promote?
Ooh, I'm going to be careful how I answer that. Bad leadership, to be honest with you. I've
Yeah,
worked for some people that, when I became an FTO, I had this vision that I was going to go hard and fast. It was going to be awesome. I was going to have this, sidekick. And
yeah,
then you realize you have like a 5-year-old you need to take care of. And that's not to disparage them. It's just they don't know what they don't know.
right,
And that was when it clicked for me. Okay, this is not about me anymore. This is not about me anymore. It's about me maybe a little bit, but it's about this other person, right? And I knew that, but I didn't know it till I felt it, right? So it becomes about this other person. When you become a sergeant, it is never about you again if you're doing it right, in my opinion. If you're a leader, a true, first line supervisor like a sergeant, it is not about you, and it never will be about you again. So what motivated me to promote, and I found out all of this later, but I had some bad sergeants, some bad lieutenants whose leadership style was, how many accolades can I collect for myself? It was very personal for them. And you can tell that they're just career people that they don't care about their subordinates, and they know who they are. Okay. Um, they, they didn't have that same line of thinking that I did. And then there's different ways to go about leadership. I'm not saying mine is the only one, but I met some people that it was not about their subordinates at all. It was about them. So that motivated me to, because I remember telling myself, I don't want to work for people like this. I don't ever want to experience this again. So you think promoting would get you away from that, but it just brings you up in another
Yes.
area of where you're
Yes.
looking up again, going, I don't want to work for this either. You know,
Yes.
but but at least I do feel like it was a step in the right direction. I miss being an officer, hooking and booking and running around. We all know,
Yeah.
you leave that behind when you promote, but
Yeah.
definitely no regrets.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you 100%. I used to tell myself, and I certainly did, once I promoted, and I've worked with and for some of the best people, and I've worked with and for some of the worst people,
Yes,
and
yes.
so you just kind of take it all into perspective, and then once you put those stripes on, now you need to ask yourself, how is anyone gonna view you in that work with for some of the best or worst or otherwise, and it's certainly uh, both challenging and a responsibility. And um, what roles or what challenges have you had as a sergeant, as a leader, that you think has made it, maybe a little more difficult than you thought, or better yet, what have you found that made it easier?
Well, I'd say in the very beginning, it was that transition from being an operator and a doer out in law enforcement, doing the job, to, hey, you're no longer doing it.
Yeah,
You're facilitating other people doing it and guiding and directing and motivating and training them.
yeah,
That was hard. The first couple months, I'm chasing stolen cars and, you get talked to and, okay, yeah, they're not wrong.
yeah.
You got to get it out of your system, right? So that transition was hard, but it happened quick. And I did my probationary years as a sergeant in Watts in Southeast. I mean, how could you not? I mean, there's so much
Engage.
going on.
Yeah,
And yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on there, right? That was hard in the beginning, but there were some people that pulled me aside and said, and a really good sergeant told me this. He said, "Your chapter as a police officer is already written. There's no more adding to it. There's no more. There's not. That's done. It's set in stone. Now you need to write your next chapter as a supervisor." So he kind of showed me that, hey, this is over. This is what needs to be new. But to answer your question, the hardest part was that early transition, dealing with personnel issues, especially when you're still in that mindset of, hey, I want to do the job and now I have to pull two people away from fighting each other, not physically, but just the arguing, the not getting along, and it's always over something petty or trivial. And you're like, okay, this is now my responsibility. I have to deal with this. I can't get away from this. But that's the job of a supervisor. That's the job of a leader in the organization. It's not sexy, it's not fun, but it is a function and it has to be met with the same care that you would anything else that you care about, right?
yeah,
So those were tough too. I would say that that's probably the toughest because it's hard watching two police officers that, unconditionally I care for because we're on the same team, not be able to get along. That's difficult because I'm
sure.
like, hey, guys, we're all on the same team, but you got to work through that uncomfortable emotional incident, right? And that happens in any work environment, not just law enforcement.
Right.
But what has made it nice is, I had a great mentor whose example I've followed. I met him at Valley Forge. He's a good friend of mine, and he was able to get some of his. He was in the 101st Airborne in the U.S. Army, and he was able to, from the Camp Pennsylvania attack, I'm sorry, not officers, some of his soldiers were killed and injured, and they never received the Purple Heart. So he campaigned, did the legwork, did all of that, and I actually went to Fort Campbell last month. Pete Hegseth was there, Secretary of War. He finally, got this through, and they were awarded the Purple Heart. That example right there, I took that example, and he's been doing this for years. I saw incidents at LAPD that went unrecognized. You know, uh, Acts of valor, acts of bravery. Some of them years old, some of them recent. I took the initiative, put in the paperwork, wrote it up, did all of that, got the signatures I needed to, and then you see them go and get the Medal of Valor, our highest honor for bravery and courage. And that's what it's all about. So that's been a great part of the challenge of the leadership that you're asking me, is seeing those people be developed in that way and be recognized for their acts of bravery and courage,
Yeah.
when they haven't been.
Well, that sounds like an amazing way to view both leadership and the role of a supervisor. Um, Unfortunately, it's not always seen that way, and so it's really inspiring to hear you, speak in those terms. Um, need more, need more people like that, and in at a time when um, public opinion of both law enforcement and some ways even the military can be looked down on. I think it's important to have people who really shine and create a better bridge between us and the public, and even us and and politicians, because those are the people who a we work for, and b who influence how things happen for us and with us. And so it's great to hear you speak that way. Um, your current assignment as a sergeant is where?
Hollywood Division.
And what specifically are you doing in Hollywood Division? And well, let me take a step back. Um, Before you answer that, again, I think in my mind, and in the mind of anyone who doesn't live in or around LA, when you say, "Oh, he works in Hollywood," like, "Oh, wow, okay, you must have a whole book of autographs, and you must see stars galore, and it must be a really cush job." Um, And then you realize, well, no, I didn't say it was Beverly Hills. I said it was Hollywood. And so what's the what's the misconception of working in Hollywood division, and what more specifically are you doing in that division?
So I'm assigned to the gang enforcement detail at Hollywood area. And I think the misconception that people have, and it's okay that they do, it's of no fault of their own. They don't know what they don't know, and they see what they see. And um, Hollywood is an interesting place to be a police officer. You have the Hollywood Hills, right? Beautiful homes, wealthy people, connected people, nice cars, right? Resembles Beverly Hills. Then you have the entertainment district below that, right? And that's a mixed bag because you have tourists from other countries who are coming here to be impressed by Hollywood. And they come to see the Walk of Fame, Chinese theater, Pantages, Egyptian theater, all of these places that are iconic and historical. And then you have the residents living there. You have to the east of Hollywood along the Western Corridor and Lemon Grove Park area, you have some of your lower socioeconomic areas that are, honestly, they do have crime problems and they do have problems with resident gangs in the area. So you have a mixed bag. You have affluent, you have tourist attraction, residents living in the area, and then you do have a side to it that is where gang enforcement detail does its most work because of the nature of the area. And if you were to ask somebody, what's your impression of Hollywood? I don't think they would incorporate all of those things. And you need a police officer that can go from the hills to Lemon Grove Park or Western Corridor area and everything in between along the district and know how to interact with everybody, right? So,
Yeah, that's actually a very difficult transition. I know that um, uh, in my early years, I worked in the Bay Area, and we had an officer transfer from our East LA CHP office. And man, um, I mean, he was great. His officer safety was top notch. I mean, no one was getting anything by him. I actually learned a lot from him. but he treated everyone like he was on a stop in East. And,
Yeah,
and so, when you start pulling people out from, very affluent areas in the Bay Area and, immediately, patting them down for your safety, it gets a little, it generates, complaints.
sure,
And there is
absolutely.
that, you have to understand where you're working and who the people you're working with and for. And I'm certain that sounds very prevalent in the Hollywood division. Your unit, the gang enforcement unit, what is what is it comprised of, and what are your more specific, you know, objectives within that unit?
Sure. So right now we're slotted for one lieutenant, one sergeant, 8 officers. So I'm the only supervisor. Um, well, obviously counting the lieutenant, of course. But the only supervisor who's there in the field with them during deployment in the field for our regular hours, day to day. And we have along the western corridor in Lemon Grove Park, we have MS-13, we have Clanton, White Fence, Armenian Power, and this is branching out a little bit, not directly in that area. But along those areas, it gets interesting, right? You have these resident gangs that have been there for a long time, and I haven't. That's not naming all of them. Um, but we also have an interesting thing in Hollywood where we have outside gangs coming from other parts of the city, right? And let's focus on on southern Los Angeles, right? Like Watts and Southeast Division. You have gangs that don't reside in the Hollywood area, but they will come rent an Airbnb up in the Hollywood Hills celebrating a hood day, right? And now that becomes a focus of patrol or our gang enforcement detail. So we're out there doing self initiated proactive work and looking for bad actors in the neighborhood, whether they're living resident, or coming in from another division.
Hmm. And you mentioned MS-13, um, which I think much more of a national and internationally known gang. Um, but the others, are they more locally grown? And are their sizes and numbers much smaller or equal to, say, the MS-13 group?
Whew, that's tough. I mean, we'd have to get specific, but in Southern Los Angeles, there's so many different gangs, right? And then you have different cliques and different sets and all these things. We would be here for a long time trying to navigate the rat's nest of, But MS-13, I'd say, is the most prevalent. They're the ones that come up a lot in our crime control meetings. They're the ones that come up amongst us in the unit discussing. They're the ones that tag the most. They're the ones that terrorize people the most. We have
This
these
is
other
the this is
gangs,
the
right?
for those who don't know, they're originated out of El Salvador.
Correct.
Yeah, and so, um, are they into the full gambit of crime?
They are, the shaking down the taco lady and the fruit lady for protection money, that goes back to Italian mob days, right? That practice. And it still happens to this day. And what I would say about that is, and the reason I mention that is because that's the one I think that resonates with me the most. You have people that are living in the city of Los Angeles that are terrorized by a gang who I'm assuming that if they immigrated from another country, it's probably to get away from systems like this, to get away from groups like this, right? And now they're here, and they truly are intimidated and fearful of this gang, and they're afraid to go to the police too. And there's some misconceptions about immigration enforcement that come up every now and then. We don't engage in immigration enforcement, and I think some victims are afraid. Well, we do know some victims are afraid to come forward to us for fear of deportation or some sort of immigration enforcement, and that creates a complex issue that gets my attention the most. MS being the most active, um, doing this to people who reside in Hollywood area, and then they're scared to come to us. I had a patrol had an investigation that I watched where there was a 14-year-old girl who was being sexually assaulted by a member of MS, and this guy was threatening all sorts of harm to her family. And when I asked her, I said, "What are you fearful of the most? That he's going to hurt?" She said that he's going to hurt my family. That MS brand and that MS association in these areas, in these communities, really carries some weight to it, and it really terrorizes people who do not deserve to be terrorized in this country. That, to me, I find unacceptable, especially as a victim of 9/11. You see the connection I can draw there.
Right.
I
Right.
see this, and I've said it in roll call. This doesn't happen here. I mean, it does. It should not happen here in the United States. You should not live in fear of people like this who are committing these crimes. You know?
Yeah, I think it's hard to kind of wrap your brain around it in some ways because it just becomes so much a part of the fabric of a community that
Yeah.
you almost it's just endemic, it would seem. And so how do it's like you're fighting an uphill battle, it seems, in those areas. But I certainly understand what you're saying. Um, does your unit, and I know there's more than one uh, gang enforcement unit within LAPD, do you guys work collaboratively with each other or you just operate within your jurisdiction?
Oh, no, certainly. Gang enforcement details from each division, whether it's Olympic Division, West LA, Pacific, and these are all West Bureau divisions on the west side. Um, we get tasked with mobile field force, crowd management, crowd control all the time. They like to use us for that. We're even the dedicated mobile field force response for the bureau at the bureau level. They use us for that a lot. We also collaborate on search warrants. Recently, we assisted Pacific's gang enforcement detail with a search warrant that they had. And those guys put together a really good warrant, really good presentation. Hats off to them. We collaborate division to division, right? Different geographical area gang units will collaborate with one another on search warrants, and then the ATF task force as well. We have officers assigned to that, or Marshals task force. So there's a lot of collaboration. There is a lot of that information sharing that's very important, and a lot of that pre planning, especially we like my lieutenant, he's the lieutenant of GIT, Gang Impact Team, and that's comprised of GED, which is my unit, and then narcotics. So narcotics is, they do their investigations, they bring us in on their warrants, vice versa. So there's a lot of collaboration taking place.
Yeah. The I guess when you're looking at that multi-agency, multi-unit collaboration, it's actually probably I would say not necessarily easier, but much easier to function as an agency when you have all that ability. You mentioned that you have assisted your unit has assisted in a number of different ways with warrant service, et cetera. What type of cross training does your team get and beyond what your normal activities are?
Certainly. So that's definitely a luxury that I have made sure we enjoy as a gang enforcement detail. Patrol doesn't get to do this, but uh, you know, when I took over the supervisory role in the gang unit, I wanted to ensure that my guys and girls had a lot of training, as much as I can get them. And we talked about this. The cross training I've been able to secure for them is with our SWAT team, movement training, entries, footwork, building search, those sorts of things. That was the first thing I got them right away. And then from our gang and narcotics division, simunition style training, entry training at the Marshals facility, and then another shoot day with them, firearms training, perishable skills training, good
Yeah.
8-hour training day with them, live fire. So working on everything, right? And then of course, some predicates training with the district attorney's office, and some crime tracer training and Veritrax and all these other things, right? That only enhance and develop them.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't ask what type of tactical medicine training you receive. So I'm going to go ahead and ask about that because it certainly is an important. Everything that you mentioned has a potential for requiring self care, buddy care, victim care, and I know a lot of agencies kind of, especially in an urban environment where, like, man, you could probably spit and hit an ambulance if you wanted to. Um, what what type of medical training do you receive there within your unit, and does LAPD provide to you?
LAPD has a program for tactical medicine. I believe and don't, I could be wrong on this and I don't want to misspeak, but I believe it's a 1 day training where it covers some of the things that, we covered in the training I took with you, and that you would get at most places. But again, it's only 8 hours. Um, in the unit, uh, I'm working on that with the International School of Tactical Medicine, but and like we discussed, right? And I appreciate the offer, yeah, absolutely. But as of yet, that's an area that I want to get dialed in on because I have them dialed in on firearms. I have them shoot once a week. We're going up to the range to shoot bonus and shoot for score, and I have them doing that once a week in between training sessions. But yeah, not everything is firearms, not everything is tactics, and as a person who has a medical kit put together from the training that I went with you and then other schools, my guys would tell you everything we go to, designate all these roles, designate a cover officer, arrest team, less lethal, who's going to handle a dog if we have one with the fire extinguisher, who's going to give commands, only one person's doing that. And then I always say, who's going to render aid if we use force on a suspect or if one of us gets hurt? This person is, here's my medical bag. So really, to answer your question, it's self-initiated. Um, and I think that's a good point you bring up. I could look and see what other entities are available. I haven't heard of any, but I certainly can ask within the agency to see, hey, can I get us an 8 hour something for the unit, right?
Yeah.
But it is something that I think has only emerged as super important up there with firearms and tactics within the last couple years.
Well, over the last few years and more recently, as we start to see what would appear to be more and more um, incidents of targeted violence, where you have multiple victims, or even just a few victims. This notion of integration of tactical emergency medical services (TEMS),
Mm,
where firefighters are now operating within a law enforcement force protection, and then even further, when you've got that mass casualty event. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a violent event. It could be, a natural disaster. But, this concept of rescue task force, um, where, you really require a large coordinated effort between both law enforcement and fire to effectively access, treat on the X to the degree that is only life saving, and then immediately exfil out of there to a casualty collection point, or some other
mm,
potential, even just to go straight to an ambulance. But I think it's become so important, and I know it's my focus, for law enforcement personnel, to everyone to become competent with just the most minimal life saving um, medical care that can be provided on the X, and to create that level of transport, whether it be initiated by yourselves or a coordinated effort to rendezvous with an ambulance or otherwise, just to make sure that our our brothers and sisters who are really first responding, um, have every bit of capability and an opportunity to sustain life for someone should something happen. And I know that it's always not necessarily the first thing on the list, but I'm glad to hear that you guys are doing that. And I'm not going to let you off the hook by allowing us to come down there and spend a day with you guys. But
I would
I
love
think,
that, honestly.
well,
Yeah.
yeah, no, we're definitely looking forward to it. And I know there's some great taco shops down there, so we're hoping to be able to get a we don't do so well up here in the Sacramento area.
We'll
I
show you.
remember when I was down there for an extensive period of time in training. It was like an international market, and I can't remember where it was at, but man, some of the best food there. Kind of a workaround from from training to food, but you got to eat. Um, anyway, I just think it's important, and I'm glad to hear that you certainly, one. I'm glad that you came to our training, and I'm glad, you're kind of instilling that into the people that that you work with and that you have working under you, because I think the next generation of people, I mean, it's got to become a common language for it to become more more widespread. I mean, do each of your officers carry a tourniquet? I'll just go there.
Not all of them do. But
Wow.
what we not every single one, but I would say majority do.
Yeah.
That has when I oh man, I don't want to say when I came on. I'm too young for that. You know, when I started, you did not see officers carrying tourniquets, and this
Right.
was only 2014, man. This
Yeah.
wasn't a long time ago.
Yeah.
But I remember an FTO of mine say, "Hey, come here, come look at this." And this other P2 had opened up a trunk, and he had a plate carrier, and he had, extra magazines. And this guy was ahead of his time. And now everybody has all of this. And
Right.
I know this sounds crazy, but most patrol guys, they're not carrying extra stuff. And so he busted out a tourniquet and some medical stuff. And he's like, "Hey, show me how to use that." And he's like, putting it on his arm. Anyway, the fascination from, a seasoned officer to see another guy taking this initiative was
Yeah.
a big deal.
Yeah.
Fast forward to now, you do see most younger officers, I'd say a majority, but not every single one of them, they do have that attachment on their holster with the tourniquet, or they do have one on their support side. They do have one on their belt,
Yeah.
right? And I
Yeah.
and in my unit, we carry around two medical bags, one that I put together, and one that the unit carries around when we're together. So we're cognizant of that in our area of control, but widespread the culture, it's progressively getting better. It's
Yeah.
it's it's definitely gotten much better.
Well, it's much more difficult to implement those types of changes in a large agency. And,
Yes.
it's two things. One is money, and two, it's
Yeah.
training, and then just recurrent training.
Yeah.
So where I see it most often, to in an abundance, in ways that are like, you're carrying too much, are the smaller agencies, because they find the funding, and it's just so much easier to implement. And so I totally understand, how that works. But I also see it as something at some point everyone will be on board with it. To me, I see it almost in the same way that we now see. And I don't know about yourself, but I would imagine probably everyone in your unit has an optic on their weapon. You know.
I don't.
Oh my.
Now
Okay.
now I'm not the only one that doesn't. So a majority of your patrol guys, well, out of the academy, they're coming out of the academy with optics. And it's funny because when I was a field training officer, I got one of the first few, recruit officers, freshly minted P1s that had the optics, and we were like, "Whoa, look at that! Hey, let me see that!" And
Yeah.
that wasn't a long time ago either. But now they're coming out of the academy with optics. The optic is an optional thing for people who didn't get it in the academy, and this goes into tying in with the medical gear too and the medical training. This has to be taken upon by the individual officer.
Right.
Not everybody in my unit is a firearms enthusiast. They do other things and contribute in their own way, and I need that from them too as a supervisor to accomplish the mission.
Right.
Um, but a majority do have optics. I do not carry an optic. I'm old school with iron sights on a single stack 1911 45. Okay, that's what I shoot best. Do I have optic guns? I do. Do I enjoy them? I do. But for field use, I know where my strengths and limitations are, and that's what I'm confident with.
Well,
So
I think for you, Tom, because you're a firearms instructor, right?
yes, outside of LAPD, yes.
Outside of LAPD. Um, so, and not that because I see a lot of guys who are firearms instructors, with optics, but the guys who are really good with a gun can shoot with iron sights or an optic, one way or the other. And it's kind of like being a Jedi warrior. I mean, you're a lightsaber guy, and so it's much easier for you to just whip that thing out and be an old school guy. I think I came on. Um, I actually became a firearms instructor late, and then like, oh God, the first time I put my hands on a weapon with an object, I couldn't find the dot to save my life. And,
Yeah.
it takes a while. You've got a lot of dry draws, a lot of dry draws. And then you almost become married to the notion of having it once you have it. But, you also need to make sure that you can go back to iron sights if necessary. And so, yeah, I think it's analogous to the whole medicine thing. It's a transition that will occur over time. I think 5 to 10 years from now, every weapon will probably have an optic on it. Again, it's a money thing and it's a training thing, but it's just the way things progress. I started with a revolver, and I remember thinking, God, the day that they said, "Hey, we're going to a semi-automatic," like, oh God, uh, I'm losing my 357, and
Yeah.
I was really good at dropping a speed loader in there and getting six more rounds there, and my Colt Python was no petite piece of metal, but I would never, go back to a revolver in if I was in law enforcement. I mean, you need the extra rounds. You need multiple magazines, and you would feel very uncomfortable knowing that you only had 18, you know, six at a time. But that's just the way things evolve, and so I'm sure you guys will probably swing around to it. Um, I know that, you've been involved in this unit and you've certainly had a career and certainly had time to do things. I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the incidents that you have been involved in your career. And I mean, we would be here way too long discussing every incident because each one is its own story and has
Yeah.
great value in the lesson learned from that. But you've been involved in one significant OIS in your career. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So, 9 years ago today, coincidentally, and you and I did not plan that.
I
Yeah.
specifically, set this date for this recording, when it'll air,
Yeah.
I don't know, but yeah, no, 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 I did not
No.
plan this.
No, we did not plan this. It's important to note that. But yeah, 9 years ago today, um, I was a young P2 working with a phase three P1, which means that P1 can work with P2s. They're off the field training program. Um, another unit went to a radio call of a battery. And, this is funny, but yeah, I'm eating a cupcake 1 minute in a coffee shop. And the next, we're rolling code three to a help call that this unit put out at an apartment complex only 5 minutes away. And the broadcast was, officer needs help, man with a gun, you know, RTO, rebroadcast the request for help, the address. And, upon arrival, this guy, I don't know how much detail you want me to go into, but I mean, we
As
can
much as
get
you'd
into
like
it
to. I
after.
mean, I think it's
Sure.
valuable.
Well, yeah. So, on the way there, I'm passenger, make the rifle ready, and we
What are
go
you guys
code
running with?
six.
What are you running with?
Well, when you go through the rifle program, you're trained on a Colt SP1, okay? Triangular handguard, fresh out of Vietnam.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and they're at that time, I don't think they do this anymore. I think now uh, it's different, but at that time, these things were on loan from the federal government for training. So you would get certified through post and LAPD to carry this weapon system, and after that, you would private purchase, or you could keep the Colt SP1. I ended up buying an H&K MR556A1. Heavy, all right, but that was what I picked. That was what I wanted, and I have it to this day. So while on the way there,
I know you've got
take
an
the
optic
rifle.
on it, so you're not gonna get away with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I did have an optic on it that night, and I have an EOTech on it tonight. So or today, but while on the way there, I made the rifle ready in the vehicle. We get out, and there's this gentleman on the balcony, and he's screaming and yelling, and he's armed with a 6-inch Smith& Wesson 41 Magnum. I think it was a 57-1 model, handgun, you know, large frame revolver. He ended up pointing it at his head, pointing it at the sky. Now I'm out on the street level, and picture this. I'm on the ground level. It's like 23:45 at night. And here is this guy on a balcony. Highest story was a 4-story. He's behind this balcony. He has the high ground looking down. He has cover from the balcony. I came up to like right about here, like most balconies, and it's a solid balcony. There's no slots or anything. And he's armed with a large caliber, 41 Magnum round is, for hunting, and it was going to
Yeah.
be a law enforcement round, but it didn't really quite pan out. And but a Magnum cartridge, and so clearly either suffering from a mental illness or some under the influence of some sort of intoxicant or narcotic or a combination of both. And he goes back inside the apartment, redeployed to a better position of cover, and the balcony sliding door is open. The room starts lighting up blaze orange. You could see it from the angle of the street into the apartment, the ceiling to the apartment he was in, and it was lighting up blaze orange. And you could hear the gunfire. And I thought, okay, he's using this weapon to inflict serious bodily injury or death. So at that point, I called out, "Hey, Diamond Up!" And it was interesting. I was working the Hollywood Entertainment District unit I mentioned earlier. We had been through a lot of MAC-TAC training throughout that year to respond to terrorist incidents, and basically forming up in a diamond formation and moving towards the sound of gunfire. And so I said, "Hey, let's diamond up, diamond up. I'll take point, obviously with the long gun." Right before we started to move, or as we were moving, he reappears on the balcony, starts to take a shooting position or platform. And at that point, OIS occurs out on the street. Suspect is, the threat was stopped at that point. Ultimately, what had transpired was, we find out about this later. He, um, he and his roommate may have been a domestic. Not really sure on the details. There were some things in the investigation, the lawsuit, that maybe led to maybe that this was a domestic, which you and I both know is a dangerous thing for any peace
Yes.
officer.
Yes.
Domestics get away from you quick, and they get
Yes.
violent. The emotion involved, it's understandable, right? Um, but this presented itself as a battery radio call. No relationship indicated. Roommate only. Well, he refused the caller refused a private person's arrest. The victim refused a private person arrest, wanted to get his stuff and leave. So the officers that were upstairs were doing a civil standby. Okay, we'll help you, stand by with you while you get your things, make sure everything's peaceful. I just want to leave. Okay, fine. At that point, suspect presented this weapon, and, the officers took a barricaded shooting position in the hallway using the door frame to the apartment. And that was when they requested help. So what we had observed from outside, was when the room was lighting up orange, was the first OIS that took place upstairs. So he had punched out at some point with the revolver towards the officers, and that resulted in an officer involved shooting. So then he ran from there out towards the balcony towards us, resulted in a second officer involved shooting, right? So ultimately, this thing went through its investigation process, through Force Investigation Division at LAPD, and the attorney, not the attorney general, district attorney, and civil lawsuit followed. But everything came back above board in policy, and um, justifiable homicide by a peace officer. I don't like saying that term, but that's the terms that are used. And ultimately, administratively, it came back above board, and lawsuit settled, and here we are 9 years later today. So.
Tom, a lot of people, I would say a lot of people outside of law enforcement, they could hear this story, and just as you put it, and it's comprehensive enough and tells the story of what went on, and you can almost draw a conclusion, even though not all the facts are in, but you can see where this was going, and you can almost say what his motivation was, for coming back out onto the patio. Um, but what people don't understand is what occurs after the fact. Now, the mere fact of that justifiable homicide by a peace officer, and like you said, as strange and as cold, the word homicide, denotes something almost bad, but justifiable, absolutely. But what people don't sometimes understand is what occurs after that, and the process that occurs for every officer who's involved in that incident, um, and the way it will really um, kind of envelop your life for an extended period of time, and certainly in the immediate, will put you through the ringers. Can you describe to whatever degree you're able to or would like to what occurs after an officer is involved in a shooting?
Sure, I'll speak from my experience because I can't really speak for everybody. I'd imagine it's situational and different for everyone depending on their incident. For me, I was 25 years old, man. This was something that happened fast. It was loud. It was it was violent, and it was over as quick as it started. And there is this moment right after it happens where you go, "My God, what have I done?" And that's just a human reaction. And in the moment when you did what you had to do, we're responding to somebody else's actions. And that's the best way I can describe it. But you still have this feeling of, oh my God, this is, what have I done? What has happened? And, over time, there's a healing process that takes place. And that was my reaction. And all the circumstances that I had described to you, you know, this shooting, comparatively speaking to others, is pretty straightforward. I
Yeah,
mean, it's not like mistake of, hey, was this a wallet or a cell phone? No, this was a loaded handgun. No question. You know, Later find out there's a rifle and body armor also in the apartment. Irrelevant, but context. Um, but even still, with circumstances being straightforward and everybody seeing the same thing and forming the same opinion at that final moment, when you get through this investigation process and then you get sued and you start hearing things like Fourth Amendment violation, seizing somebody's person indefinitely under color of authority, all of these things, you
right.
start going, whoa, 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 I hold on. Am I remembering this the way, like, this is what happened? He was armed with a gun. This is what he did. I responded to those actions, right? Um, it'll make you second guess yourself. These lawyers and all of this reconstruction and, rehashing and, it starts to take its own, you start hearing it in different forms and narratives and you go, no, 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 no. So there's a period where you get, it's the horse is beaten to death so many times through that process. What I would advise to anybody that's going through this when they get sued or there's this investigation and all of that, there's going to be a lot of noise. There's going to be a lot of distraction. There's going to be a lot of things, especially nowadays, this was pre body cam, I'd say anti police sentiment. Today, everything is critically viewed, and it should be. I mean, the use of force by a peace officer is a very serious thing. It's not something I take lightly. Use of deadly force by a peace officer is something to be taken serious. But today, you'll go through a certain level of um, scrutiny. I didn't go through that, but I can't imagine the magnification today of what I went through given those circumstances. What I would advise to people is just remember the facts. Don't get caught up in other narratives. Remember why you did what you did and stay true to those things. Hold on to them and ride out the storm. And that's the best piece of advice because you'll hear other narratives, other people saying things. You'll read things online. You'll see reels on social media. That's why I don't have social media. But you'll see things that'll try and twist that incident into a different direction. You have to just stay true to what you did and why you did what you did.
Yeah. Um, and I know that that the department and maybe the DA's office, has their job to do. Um, but what about support for the officer? And so, even on the day of, do you find that there's enough support? Does your union come to is there usually someone from a shooting team that is like one on one with you and gonna, because they're gonna take away your weapon, right out of the
Yeah,
chute,
they yeah.
and they're
Mhm.
probably gonna maybe even take your clothes and put you through a process of it almost feels like a booking, and but do they say it now? Hey, listen, hey Tom, I'm your area rep or I'm your union rep, and I'm gonna shepherd you through this process. I'm gonna make sure that you get enough to eat. I'm gonna make sure that you need some rest. Let's get you out of this environment right now. Let's these types of processes and the type of assistance. Was that afforded to you back then, or do you know is that still a process that is in place today?
Absolutely, and that's one of the great things about working for LAPD is they have this part down, and they're always refining this process. This is something that I think was overlooked, um, maybe your generation prior to mine. Um, that day, representatives from Officer Representation Section come out. We have our own, ORS, Officer Representation Section, and they ensure that all of your police officer bill of rights are met. Lawyers, from the league come out, and just making sure that the process is fair and done accordingly, right? Because these things are complicated. They don't happen too often, but there's not many repetitions to get in on something like this. They happen, but there can be administrative and procedural mistakes made. But they do a pretty good job. That night, league rep came out, lawyer came out. You speak with them. Today, they would review body worn with you. And then you would prepare for your interview with detectives from Force Investigation Division, and you give your statement.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, we have our own BSS, Behavioral Science Services, police psychologists. And to return to the field, at that time, we were out for 2 weeks, just kind of as you know, let's give some time between the incident and between you returning to the field, which I think is appropriate. And BSS, you have to go see BSS, and they will let the captain know if this person can return to full duty in the field. And there's 3 sessions that are required before you're all done with this whole investigative process throughout, and it takes about up to a year. But that BSS support component, the league responding, having somebody from officer representation section, those things are in place to support the officer. Certainly.
Yeah, and once again, to go back to a word that you used at the onset of our conversation, everything starts to seem almost surreal. Not only
Yeah.
there on the day of the incident, but the process. And someone could sit down and tell you what the process will be like, but until you're, if you're until you're involved in an OIS or any other incident that's going to rise to that level of scrutiny, um, you don't have any idea of A, what it's like, and B, how you're gonna feel about it, because, at least in the and I've had I've been to a couple of OISs, but fortunately, I was not anywhere in the, capacity to pull a trigger, certainly weapons drawn, but, there's still to whatever degree I was questioned, I thought, "Wow, this is," I mean, I didn't do it. I wasn't there. I wasn't right there. I didn't pull a trigger. I felt like I had. And so I can't imagine what it feels like if you are a person who finds himself, having to stare down someone and having to make that decision to take their life. That alone has its own implication. And then having to now also face whatever the process is. And I don't want to say scrutiny because that's a word I've already used, but I'm just, it feels scrutinizing because it's just a process
Yeah.
that is used to determine, if it's justifiable and with their hopes to clear you. Because as you said, the lawyers are coming. You and I both know that every bullet has a lawyer attached to it.
Yes, I
Um,
do.
and so that's really what I feel like the agency and the DA is trying to mitigate at that point. Um, and it's important to remember that that's kind of why they're doing that in the first place. But um, it's definitely something that kind of sticks with you. Here we are 9 years after the fact. Um, Do you still have any is there still any reverberation from that?
I would say over the years there were some. Um, Anybody who's been through that, they'll tell you that there is some effects that carry throughout the years. I'd say at this point in time, definitely recovered from those things.
Yeah,
Definitely feel um, those wounds have healed. What people don't understand, and again, like I said earlier, I don't fault people for not knowing this part of law enforcement. TV. It's like the misconceptions about Hollywood, right? They don't know,
yeah,
but TV doesn't show the aftermath like we're discussing now. They show the action scene, and then they're back out on the street the next day, right? Whatever. But
right.
they don't show it doesn't capture the severity and the gravity of an
Yeah,
incident like this.
yeah,
It doesn't capture the reverence that, I think that's something that gets lost. The officer and the agency, LAPD, and myself, there's a lot of reverence for the gravity of this and then that person's life. This is not a movie. This is not a video game. This is not a joke. This is something that's very serious. It affects everybody. And it is not what we wake up in the morning hoping to see or having to be a part of.
yeah.
But that is lost in entertainment. You got to remember these shows are just entertainment. They don't capture that. So, those wounds they do occur in all directions. And yeah, at this point, 9 years later, say definitely healed from those things. And I use the experience from that incident to connect with other officers as they go through them now. I've had friends the recent one I was actually incident commander at was a P1 at Hollywood, and now he's working Southeast gangs. And I was there that night. He had his officer involved shooting, and that gentleman's an example of okay, I can take my experience, having gone through this over the years, watching this play out. Now it's open and shut. What
Yeah.
can I pass on to somebody else going through this same process? What can I pass on to somebody else who's going through this and have help them heal along the way and recover from something like this?
Are you part of a peer support group within the department, Tom? Is that because that's kind of what it sounded like you were?
I am not, but we do have a support group, and the people that are in it are great. I know one guy's particular; he was born to do something like that. So we do have a system in place like that, and I think it's effective. I personally don't do it. I'm just your regular standard issue sergeant who's you know you just
Well, I mean, but then you also reached out, which again is not
yeah.
standard issue, and that's
Thank you.
I mean that's I think that's part of your character. I when someone says I've been there, and just being able to say I've been there is one thing, but to say I've been there, and so let me see if I can help you to
Yeah,
understand what it is happening to you right now. Um, and again, as you mentioned, all circumstances are different. But here's the one thing that I think most people don't understand when you've been involved in that thing. There's a number of different courts of opinion that are going to be judging you. Even your own department.
sure,
The court system themselves, and then there's just the court of public opinion that is going to make some decision based on the current times and almost sticking a wet finger in the air to see which way the wind is blowing. But today with body worn camera, we certainly have, even with that, an opportunity to clear the air, or otherwise, if that's the case. But certainly, the actions of an officer or anyone who's wearing a body worn camera for any purpose, um, your decisions in that moment are split second, microsecond in that decision. I have to make a decision now based on the totality of the circumstances that present themselves and what I'm seeing in front of me. And I've got to make that decision now, which is why you get the big bucks, so to speak, why they've entrusted you with, this awesome responsibility. And with all that said, someone someone's going to take that body worn camera and slice it frame by frame to see if you could have done something in this frame instead.
yes,
You know,
yes, yeah,
and
absolutely,
that's always the big concern, to be judged in real time or to be judged in an editing room, which can be very difficult. But I appreciate you sharing that story. You've I want to go back to like how all this affects you and certainly your personal life because I know, from what I've read and from even from what you and I have discussed, you've always been kind of um, personal about about the things that go on in your life and what have you. And so which is why I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. It means a lot to me. Um, you you've had a level of celebrity without even wanting to be a part of it in your life,
Right.
and it started at a relatively young age, long before you got in on the job with LAPD. Can you tell me a little bit about the relationship that that involves your own mom, who and I'll be quite honest with you, I'm just probably too old. I had to do a little history on her, but I ended up asking my daughter, and she says, "Oh, absolutely." In
Oh
fact, the
God.
moment I was telling her the story of you, she the moment I mentioned your mom's name, she said, "Hey, wait, hang on a second. Is this Tom Zizzo?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, "Okay, now I'm listening with both ears." So, can you tell
Yeah,
me a little bit about your mom and how
sure.
this role played into your career?
So, oh, where to begin? Well, number one, you're right. I do keep a low profile, and privacy nowadays is a luxury. But so my mom, Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, Erica Jane, right? She started out always a performer. I mean, way back. Okay, always had like I started as a young age wanting to be in service or a police officer. It goes that far back for her as well, and she has my full support. I think everybody needs to chase their dreams. I do, and she's been successful at it, and she deserves a lot of credit. And so, um, she started out singing, dancing, performing, and then this opportunity came to be on Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Now, I will correct you though. I She was a performer before I was a police officer, but I had just, I think, finished field training program at Rampart when this opportunity came up. And this is a conversation that nobody's heard, but I'll share it with you. Um, she asked me, she's like, "Do you think I should take this opportunity?" And being selfish in the moment, I said, "Please don't." I said, "Please don't." Well, why not? And it was because, and for the same reason that I've kept a low profile, a true public servant's lifestyle, peace officer's lifestyle, does not coexist with a celebrity's lifestyle. Those two things cannot happen simultaneously. And you, as a longtime peace officer, know exactly what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
When I see Instagram pages of these divisions showing their officers off, and that's not my style. It's a little cringe for me, just even that. I'm a big, firm believer in being a quiet, silent professional. Okay. You do the job because you're lucky enough to do it. You be a professional because you want to be, not for applause, not for outside external validation. And that has always been my posture. And, so in that moment, I remember when she asked me, I said, "Please don't." I said, because it's just, if I get into an officer involved shooting or I get into anything, it's just going to be a circus, right? Something to that effect. Anyway, she pursued her dreams, which I supported her. She, agreed to do the show, and she's been doing it ever since. And it's opened some doors. I mean, the 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 thing I'm most proud of for her is seeing her perform on Broadway in New York. I went and saw her perform in Chicago. And that for me was when I saw her performing on stage on Broadway, I felt my level of pride and respect just through the roof. I went, "Wow, this is awesome. This is great." And that I was okay with. But, the
You probably
housewives
got great
thing,
seats.
uh, yeah, they're all right. Yeah, they're okay. But, that's an experience that most people can't say they have. To one, perform on Broadway, but then for me to say I watched my mom perform on Broadway and,
Right.
and do an excellent job, not many people can say that. So I have to enjoy that. Now, as it relates to being a police officer out in the field, with the exposure that we just talked about that comes with it, just being a regular John Q. Public who decides to take this job and do this as a career, you can become famous in a very bad way all on your own. Okay. Now imagine that with this attached to it. Those two things can't coexist. So it's tough, and I've had people ask me, guys I don't even know, just working an overtime shift, "Hey, Sarge, aren't you so and so's kid?" Yeah, well, one, I'm not a kid, but thanks. Two, yes. "Oh, yeah, my wife asked me about that, and I thought I recognized you." Hey, man, what are you doing here? Why are you doing this? Like, you don't need to be out here with us. There's a
Yeah.
lot of there's a lot of perceptions that are wrong. There's a lot of there's a lot of that, and I've had to contend with that over the years. And again, I don't fault people. Like I said earlier, I don't fault people for not knowing what they don't know. I've kept a low profile, and I think that adds a lot of void and then a lot of mystery. And then people will just assume what they assume. They assume I'm worth a lot more than I am. They assume I live a lifestyle that I just don't. Well, Sarge, why are you working overtime? Or as an officer, hey, why are you working overtime? You don't need the money.
Yeah.
I don't need the money. Okay, they think that, right? But they
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
And so for somebody like me, I can sit there and knowing the reasons I became a police officer and why I continue to do this and why I'm pushing myself so hard to be disciplined at this profession. I could take offense to those things, right? I could sit here and go, I'm offended, and it hurts, because people are going to see you a certain way, and it's kind of hard to change people's minds, and it's a lot of work and all of that. But at the end of the day, I run my own race. I can't change everybody's minds. Some people I'm never going to be able to please because they grew up a certain way and they think I grew up that much better or I have it much better than they do right now.
Sure.
I got the same problems you do, guys. Okay. Maybe sometimes worse. Um, it is what it is, and problems of all natures and all kinds. Um, but I have chosen, to dedicate my lifestyle to this profession. There's no other lifestyle that can share my time and energy and attention. It all has to go to this one lifestyle. Like I said before, I have no regrets. I have no regrets. And could there have been more lucrative, sexier opportunities? Yeah, I turned those down because this is more important to me. And some people can't believe that. Some people are just, they don't get it. Well, if I was you, I'd do this and this. And I go, well, bud, let me give you a week in our shoes, my mom's shoes. Okay, go online and tell me, could you survive a week in those shoes? It's not glamorous like you think. It's
Right.
not what you think it is, right? Just like people don't know what this job is all about. They don't know what her job is like, right? So that's what I got to say about that.
Well, that's more than enough, and I appreciate you saying it, um, and giving us a glimpse of what it's like to be, the son of someone who's in that position. Because um, it's almost difficult to imagine it not becoming a part of your life. But I mean, I think you made an extra effort to ensure that the two don't cross paths, and um, it's hard to imagine that. And have you found at all where your association, the fact that Erica Jane, that's your mother's name, right? Is that her?
That's her stage name, but
That's her
Erica
stage name.
Girardi, yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And has that in any way crossed over to your job as a police officer in terms of work that you've done or cases that you've been involved in, implications that have been made at all?
Oh, certainly. I mean, in a couple ways, right? And first, I'd like to say the only, like I said, low profile, my lifestyle. I only agreed to do this because you and I are friends, and
Appreciate it.
the angle that you're coming from and the context that we're having this conversation in is consistent with that lifestyle I spoke about and consistent with who I am, right? So I have no problem speaking about it in this context. But yeah, it has bled over, and in ways that if people knew, they'd go, "Yeah, I wouldn't trade my lifestyle for the you know what they perceive to be better," right? How about this? When she receives death threats, and this has happened over the years, there's an attachment. I get attached to that too, right? LAPD, I'm going to kill your son, cop this. You get the anti sentiment, you get the anti police sentiment, and you get the anti celebrity Erica Jane sentiment, right? So you get these things converging, right? And overlapping. So that's happened in the past. And, that gets reported to the department and you know, they have that information. And then there's times where, at a radio call, I've been recognized. Nobody said anything to me, but they'll, DM my mom on Instagram. My mom had a very nice DM from a lady who was a victim of a crime in the 80s. And I went to her house. I had two P1s with me. We were short on FTOs. I had two P1s assigned to me. I'm training both of them. I sat in the back seat while they drove and passenger, and I just watched them operate as an A car. But, we went to a call and she, didn't say anything at scene, but she messaged my mom and said, he was out there and he was training these guys, or these guys were younger, something to that effect. And I felt very secure, very safe. I was glad he showed up, and you should be proud of him. All nice things. And I'm trying to go off of memory here, but positive interaction,
Yeah. Wow.
So that's happened before. And then I had one guy who I was booking for an ADW. He recognized me, and I was like, okay, now this is where it becomes a circus. And that's the kind of thing that, I was hoping to avoid.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: I don't have social media.
Yeah.
I'm not a TikTok cop, Sal. You know that.
Yeah.
Um, I don't broadcast. I don't advertise. I don't talk about it. Um, to me, these are careers and these are lifestyles that people have chosen, and people are interested in hers more than they are mine, and all the attention can go there, and I'm fine with it. But it has sometimes overlapped. Recently, in the most notable way, um, I was working an L car, man, by myself. Went to a call of a shooting. Ultimately, everybody with all parties are gone on arrival, and then I get a subpoena. Oh man, like a year later or something about something around that, like year or so later. And it was the ASAP Rocky trial where he was, charged with shooting at one of his friends, and I had to go testify, and I was like, I wonder if I'm gonna fly under the radar here. And no, it didn't
Yeah.
happen. But I was sitting there.
If you're at a call
If you,
and a lady is DMing your mother,
yeah,
what makes you think
and
you're gonna
and
get away unscathed on this one? Yeah.
Yeah, and so if you look it up, ASAP Rocky, big time rapper, and hey, I like some of his music too. But listen, I was just a P3 working by myself. I went to a shooting call. We handled the call for service, and then you get the subpoena in the mail, and then it turns into this. You can't write this, Sal. Like, you cannot make this up. You can't write this. And it's funny because when we have these conversations amongst me and my mom, we're like this, like, oh my god, like nobody did anything wrong here. Like, we're just
Yeah.
trying to trying to keep
Yeah.
things separate. But this is LA. This is kind of something that can happen. So, testified in that, and the verdict went the way it did. And but once I testified that day, I was driving back. I was working southeast. I was driving back, and I was like thinking about it. I was like, "You think I flew under the radar?" I'm like, "Yeah, I think I did. I think I'm good." I pull into the lot. I look at my phone, and I've got links to TMZ from all different people. I'm like, "Oh man," and they had made the connection, and it wasn't bad. It wasn't anything, but I just don't like. Yeah, just trying to fly under the radar,
Yeah.
man. Just trying to
Yeah.
do my job, and just that's it. So
Yeah, that's actually, it's pretty impressive that you've gone this far with minimal exposure, because
yeah,
you certainly could have, I'll just say, parlayed it into something much greater if you
sure,
chose to. Um, and and then it would have probably been out of control. You know,
absolutely.
you would have needed an agent, and everything that goes along with that. Yeah, that's kind of a difficult thing to have to deal with, and I know that you mentioned you still have a really close relationship with your mom, and so, um, you know, it's good that you at least continue that, because the last thing you would wanna do or have to do is like, "Okay, we can't even, be in the same world in any capacity." That's
And that's tough. A lot of people, I'll say this, it's tough. My mom and I do have a good relationship. It's tough because, you know, do you see any pictures of me and my mom out in public? There are none.
Yeah,
That's not by mistake.
yeah,
So I invite people to ask themselves, could they have a relationship with their mother where they have to, adjust for that, adjust for the notoriety, adjust for the celebrity, right? Adjust for those things. Most families couldn't do that. That would be a strain on the relationship.
right.
So that's very, very tough to do. And I appreciate you pointing out, I want to touch on it. Um, I talked about earlier how I can't be a public servant and a celebrity at the same time. Had I, like you said, parlayed into, if I had leaned into that and taken advantage, like some people had encouraged me to do, or some people are like, why wouldn't you? Could you imagine if I had done that? And then I go to this radio call and it turns into this high profile case.
Yeah,
Could you imagine the circus that would have ensued? And that for me was the exact kind of scenario that I knew several years, like a decade earlier, was a potential, was something that could happen. And I wanted to prevent exactly that. So that meant a lot to me. That was a nod from, God or whoever saying, you did the right thing. Because to me, the ensuing circus is not consistent with my image of what a peace officer should be or should be doing for the public. And I'm glad it went the way it did and preserved the professionalism, respected the brand. I would hate to tarnish the brand of LAPD.
right. There's been so much. There've been so many movies. Just as I'm listening to you, and I'm sure I can't imagine if you're an LAPD officer or otherwise that that you probably like begrudgingly maybe even like have to watch all the movies that involve LAPD. And I kind of one of my favorite movies is LA Confidential.
I was hoping you'd say LA Confidential. That is favorite movie.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean
Yep.
the because there's a lot of good cop, bad cop in that, and the one role of I can't even remember his name, where he basically is kind of hooked and connected with Hollywood. Um, and
Kevin
ultimate
Spacey,
Kevin Spacey, yes.
Jack Vincennes.
I mean, it's a great
Yes.
movie. And then shit, who is it? Is basically the not necessarily a well-liked cop, but a hard-nosed cop, and he's a good cop, but, there's just a lot of things in that movie where, like, people get a misconception of Hollywood and LAPD because, like, if it's on screen, it must be true,
Mm,
and, all these things are going on, and I'm sure, again, it's a large agency, it's in Southern California, it's right in you know, right in the middle of Hollywood and in the breadbasket of everything that is glitzy and shiny. Um, I'm sure that there are opportunists within the department that probably have, but I mean, that's
absolutely.
that's like the hardest. I mean, if I'm the police chief, um, and just trying to manage all those things and making sure that like, okay, who's in the news today,
Yeah,
and I'm sure they appreciate you very greatly not being one of those people. And it's certainly I think it's worked out well for you because I think it's just who you are and you have objectives that you want to meet. You mentioned that you're in a graduate program right now.
yes, I'm pursuing my Master's of Science
Okay.
through National American University for Terrorism and Counterterrorism.
Very good. So then that means I can ask you questions in that line as well.
Sure.
Why did you choose that major?
Well, again, 9/11 being the driving force
Mhm.
for getting into law enforcement, I wanted to get I wanted to get my master's. And I asked myself, okay, this is going to be a lot of work, a lot of money. You got to find something that you are going to get bang for your buck in your career. It's got to be consistent with the career goals and it's got to be interesting. And I was like, I wonder if there's any counterterrorism or terrorism fields of study out there. And you'd be surprised. This is like one of two or three. I know there's a doctorate's program at another university. Not eligible for that. You got to have your master's first. But And there's other variations, homeland security, this and that, incident management or public policy, these other deviations. But this one was a hard up terrorism, counterterrorism. And look, is it from Harvard? No, it's not. Okay. But it's a good field of study, and it's rigorous enough to say you got your master's, and I'm enjoying it. I am, because it also puts a lot of it's serving two purposes. One, I think it's an area of interest to me, for obvious reasons. So I get to explore the why. I get to explore the complexities of it. I get to learn about it.
Yeah.
And it kind of gives some closure to 9/11. It gives some understanding. It gives some bigger picture. It definitely provides something there. I don't know how to describe it, but it does do something there. And then also too, you know, um, it's consistent with the goals I have for my career and getting into, counterterrorism special operations bureau at LAPD. This is definitely something that I think would be advantageous to have in terms of being an expert or subject matter expert in counterterrorism. And, here's the thing: when we think of terrorism, you know, you and I might think of Al Qaeda, Taliban, international stuff. But, when you look at these domestic terrorists and these narco terrorist organizations and networks, that's the new that's new, and that's what we're going to be dealing with here on the home front. And for
Yeah.
LAPD, being a peace officer in the street,
Yeah.
you got to know how to deal with groups like Antifa. You got to know how to deal with these militant
Yeah.
groups that are out in the street. Because I think there's a difference between somebody who's on a mobile field force dealing with Antifa and these other groups, domestic terrorist groups, not having that understanding versus somebody who does and can take action earlier or form opinions that the other person can't. I think that is advantageous to have to serve the community and to provide to the department. So,
With with the polarizing politics that we live in today, um, it's almost incumbent that every peace officer at least have their eyes and ears just kind of, you know, up and listening and watching. Because I hate to be a fearmonger, but you mentioned domestic terrorism, which I think is the biggest threat
yes, it is.
to our country right now. I mean, there's and depending on who you talk to, they'll tell you, no, no, no. Especially in the current situation that we are abroad, we have a lot of enemies, and we have a lot of state sponsored terrorism that has great potential in this country. I don't disagree with that at all. But every day there are groups and individuals who are planning, um, small scale, medium scale, large scale terrorism on this country. And the definition, it meets it by definition, in many ways. And so it's important that we take a closer look, at our own country. And just the internet net alone has created an opportunity. I'm sure you'll find this out through your studies. How so much radicalization is is achieved through you know the internet, and how it's affecting our young people, and then how they then gather ideas and start moving in other directions. um it's great that you're doing this, because I think it's gonna you're like one step ahead of the game. Does LAPD get involved with any of the threat centers, JRIC, or even maybe part of the JTTF at all?
Oh, certainly. Recently, I took it used to be terrorism liaison officer course,
Yep.
threat liaison now. So yeah, there's still those training opportunities and those collaborations and with the fusion centers and everything, and that's really important because I've been in this program almost 2 years, and I have I think maybe another 6 to 8 months left, and it's at this point starting to become repetitive that there's long-term counterterrorism initiatives and measures that are going to be successful that are really hard to accomplish, right? But in the interim, in the meantime, the short-term goals, that information sharing, the fusion centers, that collaboration and communication amongst agencies and entities, it needs to be strengthened, it needs to be established, and it's something that has caught up in recent years, but before, you'd be surprised it wasn't as strong. And so now it's that information sharing and that collaboration is there.
Yeah. Yeah. ISTM is pretty heavily involved with the Fusion Center here in Northern California, CCIC, the Central California Intelligence Center. And, we do a lot of, grant funding programs for civilian training and response. But I'm well aware of, the current TLO programs that are in place and especially, the other programs that are part of that, including which you're probably aware of the suspicious activity reporting initiative that is
Certainly, yeah.
kind of part of that, and how like everybody, everybody, because if we're all relying on TLOs to push the ball forward and to try to proactively prevent as opposed to respond. I mean, you're familiar with left of bang, right of bang concepts, and so um, we've got to get more people involved in left of bang capability. And certainly the SARS program is one of the major ones there. And I imagine you said you're a TLO. How active are you involved in that? And if at all, is it? Do you think it's accomplishing what it's set out to do?
Well, I'm not the TLO at Hollywood. Another gentleman is. I'll give him the credit. But having gone through that training, I can say that it is active. It is there. I think, especially for a division like Hollywood, and not to be an alarmist, but we are talking reality here. If you look at jihadi ideology, Hollywood, pretty rich target. Okay, with the symbolism of Western culture and the symbolism of the international stage, right? That's a place to pay attention to. We have a good TLO gentleman at Hollywood. He does a good job disseminating information, and you know, I think it's one of those things that, like most things in a peace officer's career, they have to take that initiative. They have to be proactive. They have to recognize the responsibility given to them and push that ball forward.
Yeah. Um, it, I think it's sadly the wave of the few. The more AI becomes a part of our everyday life, the more you'll see the potential that it has in terrorism and the
Yeah,
potential for hurting people and plotting out. I mean, I'm sure LAPD has a pretty strong drone system program. I mean, every time I watch a movie and I see drones launched against people and things, I'm like, um,
yeah.
the potential is so greatly there, and so much of it in the prevention of it has so much to do with people seeing something and saying something. That's really what it comes down to now, and trying to be one step ahead of people who are plotting against us. Hey, listen, and let me also say this, because as you're telling me all the things that you're doing, um, you and I both know there are only 24 hours in a day, and I know a few people like you, Tom, who
Okay.
somehow have found the 25th hour, um, and are able to be in several places at one time, including this podcast recording, um, and still be at work and still do overtime and still, and still go to school and still do a lot of training. Um, the reason I bring this up is that, part of this whole process, and I realize you're a young guy, um, is being able to maintain good, strong mental and physical health. Your thoughts on how peace officers can better themselves in those ways?
On physical and mental health?
Yes.
So this is a good question. It covers a lot of things. I have the luxury not being married, no kids. The only commitment I have is to myself and my, responsibilities at work. I have a personal trainer, you know, um, somebody with the expertise and, the time available to go and do that has been very beneficial. Not everybody has the availability, flexibility, time that I do. You got single parents out there that can't do that. Everybody's situation is different. So I I have it a little easier than most. I recognize it's not as all simple as me saying, just work out, just get on the treadmill. It's not that simple. You got single mothers out there on the job trying to hold it down, single parents and single dads, et cetera. You got people that need to care for their elderly parents, elderly grandparents. They got special needs kids. There's not a whole lot of time they can dedicate to themselves. However, if you are in this line of work, it's my belief that you have to dedicate whatever you can that is left in the day to yourself to take care of your mental health. Mental health being number one. Thankfully, and I can only speak for LAPD, not every agency has this luxury. We have our behavioral science services, they're great people. Utilize those resources. They've got individual counseling. You can self refer yourself, right? They've got couples counseling for you and your marriage. Some people, they really value their home life and marriage above assignments at work.
Good.
There's nothing wrong with that.
That's
I
great.
had a guy tell me the other day, I offered him a spot in the unit, and he goes, "You know what? I value my marriage too much. I can't do it." I'm like, "Okay." So that's your work life balance, right? Um, BSS has those resources to maintain those relationships, maintain your mental health, and so that's all free to my officers. Also, too, they have a nutritionist, right? You can consult with them, get on a good diet. If you're going to be in this line of work, I really think, actually, I know you have to be in good physical health. You have to be in physical shape. And I know everybody's path to that goal is going to be different. Some are much harder than mine. I understand that because of time and money and obligations. But this career is a marathon. It's not a sprint. You got to have something to show at the end of 30 years. If it's your stable marriage and kids, healthy kids off to do their own things, and that's what makes you happy, you got to secure that. Okay. If it's your good health at the end and long retirement, collecting that pension, we want to see you make it to that. That's my job as a supervisor is to make sure my people get to the next spot in their careers unscathed, tactically or administratively, both being safe, so they can enjoy that retirement. But you got to find a way, whatever it takes to chisel out that extra time or that extra resources to spend on your physical health, whether it's personal training, dieting, supplements, whatever. And this is not from somebody who was a jock in high school. I was not. There's no trophies from high school. Okay. Um, my dad couldn't get me off Xbox to go do anything, right? But I'm not an athlete. I was not born an athlete. I'm not a jock. I'm not one of those people, but I'm one of those people who's very disciplined and knows that this job calls for. I don't like going to the gym. I don't like getting up at 3 in the morning to be there at 4 in the morning. But I'm blessed to have that opportunity and a trainer who's up at that time and the ability to pay for somebody like that. I'm blessed to have that. But from somebody who's not, a sports guy, a jock, or any of those things, I know that this is required for my line of work. This is required for me to serve my officers, my community, for me to meet the organization's goals and to meet my career goals. There is a level of physical fitness required for where I want to go. So these things are important and they need to be maintained. So the only thing is I could say is you have my full support if anybody ever needed anything, but just try and find that extra time for yourself. A lot of people forget about themselves along the way. You can't do that. People are relying on you, then you got to put your own mask on before you can put somebody else's on, like on an airplane.
Yeah. Um, Advice for someone who says, I listened to a podcast with Tom Zizzo, and I think I'd like to be a law enforcement officer. What advice would you give to that 9-year-old who's out there who is now might be, thinking that he or she would like to do this, or they're in the more formative years and are ready to go? What advice would you give them? In today's world where there's a lot of other things to do, but this is what they'd like to do. What would you tell them?
For those out there that do feel that way, number one, hats off to you because recruiting and retention is the hardest challenge we have in law enforcement right now. The profession was so demonized post 2020
Yeah,
at LA and abroad, you can't get people to do this job.
yeah,
So if you do want to do this job, thank you and hats off to you. After that, I would say this: you don't know what it's going to be like. What you think it's going to be, I promise you, you're wrong. And that's okay. It's okay to be wrong. Do not come in anticipating it's going to look like X because it's 100% going to look like Y. I promise you. You need to come into this job doing it for the right reasons, okay? And you need to be prepared to do the right thing for the right reason at the right time. Don't come in here thinking that this is going to um, get you phone numbers at the bar or inflate your ego in some sort of way. If you're coming in with those sorts of motives, I don't think this is for you. Okay. This is going to require, it's a labor of love to be a true police officer out on the street and still doing it. And even more so to be a supervisor later down the road. So be sure that this is something you want to do. I would not listen to the people who tell you in law enforcement not to do it. If this is something that is a fire in your chest and you feel it and you feel compelled to do this, there's a reason you feel that way.
Yeah.
You may not feel that way at the end of a 30-year career, but the regret you will have not doing it will be there 30 years later.
Which kind of
So
ties
do
in
not.
with maintaining good health because if you make it to that end of the 30-year career, now you've got to, got to live the next 30 plus years in in a body that needs to be able to enjoy that that pension and that time in retirement.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And yeah,
yeah. Well, listen, Tom, I thank you so much for being on the show today. And when I look at your life and your career, I mean, there are a lot of things that come to mind. Certainly, um, just discipline. I mean, you appear in one way, probably one of the most disciplined guys that I know, and
thank you.
certainly a guy to be respected for it and all the things that you stand for, because you certainly have a certain level of professionalism that kind of goes along with it. Not only in your professional life, but I think you're like a professional person. I mean, you have standards that go beyond what you do in as a member of LAPD. But if you were the corporation of Tom Zizzo Inc., you would hold yourself to the same standards, and you'd probably be a great businessman. I mean,
Well, thank you.
when you decide to do that someday, I'm sure you're gonna do very well. Um, I think it's important that people understand and get a better idea of what it's like to actually not only work on the X but work off the X, and that's what you're doing in the things that you do now. Um, but while you're working in your capacity as a law enforcement officer, you're doing everything you can to stay fit, to stay well trained, to be a good mentor, to be a great supervisor, to educate yourself, and just to forward yourself into not only your career but into your life. And so, I mean, I have speaking of hats off. I have great respect for you, and hats off to you for all the things that you have done, all the things that you've endured, all the things that you probably are doing today, and all the things that you will continue to do. I expect that somewhere down the line, we'll be calling you Dr. Zizzo after you get past this master's, and because
Thank
I
you.
think you're already looking over the horizon. Um, you'll probably be on a lecture circuit someday, and just look for the old guy in the audience who says, "I know that guy."
Thank you,
I
Sal. It means
know
a
that
lot
guy.
coming from you.
Anyway, any closing thoughts and before we break away from you?
No, I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk about something that's important and means a lot to me. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And again, I appreciate you being on and taking the time and making that extra effort to actually to make yourself available and to discuss the things you talked today about. I hope that we have an opportunity to talk to you again sometime. Um, and certainly, I hope to have the opportunity to train with you at some time as well. I'm holding you to it, Tom. Okay.
No, we'll work out the details because I definitely that is an opportunity for my people that I can't I can't just let go. So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
your
Well,
training is top notch, it's top flight, and the
I
opportunity that
appreciate it.
you offered, I appreciate the offer, and I definitely am going to take you up on it because they deserve that. They deserve your attention and time, and I appreciate you making it both available to us, and I owe it to them. So thank you.
Great. Listen, again, thank you everyone who's watching today. We certainly have enjoyed bringing Sergeant Tom Zizzo, to you today to discuss not only his career, but his life uh, on and off the X. And it's been a pleasure. We look forward to seeing you all again on another time. Have a great day.